So in the previous video, I talked about the love story about my cousin John and the lady that he married, Natalie. And for this video, I would like to talk about the love story and the life stories about my parents and what can we learn from my parents and their story. And for my mom and dad, they were both born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. My mom was born in 1950, and my dad was born in 1947. And both my mom and dad went through some emotionally challenging things in their childhood. But thankfully, my mom and dad were surrounded by good, caring Christian company. And so my mom and dad would always strive to be the best people that they could be. And my parents made it through all of grade school and high school with no problem. And after graduating high school, my father went to a few college campuses, none of them Miami University, but my father went to a few college campuses, and after 5 or 6 years, my father graduated college and he got that diploma. And then after high school for my mother went to one college, Miami University in Ohio, and after 4 years, my mother graduated from college and she got that college diploma. Woohoo! And so my parents made it through all of college, no problem. But still, throughout all of school, my parents had never met each other. And after the 1970s, we roll into the 1980s. And it was in 1982, there was a lady who was 20 or 30 years older than my parents. Her name was Anne. And one day, Anne had the idea. She thought to herself, you know, here is a really nice man, my father. Here is a really nice man, Robert S. Callahan. And here is a really nice lady, Melinda Hockman. And the two of them are involved in this group, and they are both kind people, and they have never met each other. Maybe I should introduce these two people to each other. And so in 1982, my parents were introduced to each other. And after my parents got to know each other, they learned that they are both kind, honest, and self-controlled people looking for a healthy, loyal, committed, romantic relationship. And my parents also learned about each other that they care about managing money in a smart, wise way. And my parents also learned about each other that they care about the Lord and going to church and reading the Bible. And in this world of different church denominations, my father was raised as a Presbyterian and my mother was raised as a Methodist, not really too different from each other. And so my parents learned about each other that they care about the Christian faith. And also, because my parents were born in 1947 and 1950, my parents both had a love for music from the Frank Sinatra era and the Beatles era. And to top it all off, my parents also learned that they have the same birthday, December 26th. Sure, they were born 3 years apart from each other, but my parents learned that they have the same birthday. And so in 1982, 1983, and 1984, my parents got to know each other and they went out on dates. And on December 29th, 1984, my parents were married indoors at Westwood United Methodist Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. And that was long before I was born. But from what I have been told and based on the pictures that I have seen of my parents' wedding, there were about 100 to 200 people in attendance, and it was a nice, fun, and joyful time for everybody at the wedding. So my parents were married on December 29th, 1984, and my mom moves in with my dad. And a few years later, my father started his own business. My father and just one other guy, another guy named John. And not to brag, but it was through my dad's own business where he and John would take phone calls from people selling train parts to each other on the railroad. My father and his business partner John would negotiate deals with these people on the railroad, and my father and his business partner John would receive some of the money from the deals that were made. And that is how my father did very well for himself. That's how my father made a few $1,000,000. And so my father had started his own business, and he was able to support himself and his wife, my mother. And a few years later, in 1992, I was born. Nearly 8 years into my parents' marriage, they finally had a child, me. And I would be the only child of my parents. And from what I can clearly remember from the first 16 and a half years of my life when my father was still alive, and I could say both of my parents are still alive, I learned a number of positive things from my parents. And, well, I learned one or two things that I would handle a little bit differently. But when I think about the positive things that I learned from my parents were always loyal and committed to each other. They were always kind, honest, and self-controlled. And they had a healthy marriage. And, my parents both talked and preached about the importance of clean language. My parents talked about it, but my parents also walked the walk, and they demonstrated the real example of keeping their language clean with every joke and every comment they made. My parents really lived that example of keeping language clean, and that definitely influenced me to keep my language clean. And because my parents really demonstrated what it is like to treat every person in the world kindly, honestly, and with self-control, that influenced me to treat every person kindly, honestly, and with self-control. And I know that someday, when it comes to marriage, I would always strive to be loyal and committed and to have it be the most healthy marriage ever. So I learned those things from my parents. And when it comes to the subject of money, I know that my mother would be very frugal and save her money a lot, and she still does that to this day. But my father, on the other hand, I'm not trying to diss my father here when I say this, but after my father made a few $1,000,000, there were times when my father would recall a difficult memory, or my father would feel sad or upset. And there were a few times when my father would purchase something that was expensive and unnecessary, like an expensive, unnecessary new car. And I bring this up, and I just want to remind everyone out there in the world that whenever you are recalling a difficult memory, and if you ever feel sad or upset, then please work through your memories and emotions. Let us work through these things in a healthy way and talk to good, caring Christian company. And also let us never give in to emotional spending. Because when people give in to emotional spending and they spend thousands and thousands of dollars on unnecessary things, that will hurt someone's checking account. And in order to survive in this world, we have to have money to pay for food and clothing and bills. So let us never give in to emotional spending. Let us save our money, even when we are feeling sad or upset, or whenever a difficult memory comes along. Let us save our money and let us work through our problems in a healthy way. And I know for me, I have learned that whenever I feel sad or upset or I have a difficult memory, I will work through it in a healthy way and I will still save my money. So I learned that about money, and thankfully my father would always keep a close eye on his checking account. And well, when it comes to other things that I have learned from my parents, I know that I learned from my parents about the importance of going to church on Sundays and staying involved in church and reading the Bible. And I am so glad that my parents brought me to church, even when I did not care about it when I was a kid. And I know that when I was a kid, I grew up in a wealthy home, and I think I may have been spoiled. And when I was a kid, I had once thought, well, I don't care about reading the Bible. I don't care about Sunday morning church services. All I care about is music and Nickelodeon TV shows and interacting with kids at school. But then when I was 13, 14 years old, I had realized, oh, I have been relying and leaning on my own understanding. And when I have been leaning on my own understanding that goes against God, it has led to some bad results. And I also learned that in order to go to heaven, I must accept the Lord and repent of sin and get baptized and go to the Lord, ask for forgiveness, and after receiving forgiveness, leave the life of sin and now live the Christian lifestyle. And so I am very glad that I finally cared about living for the Lord. And hey, I continued to go to church every Sunday because my parents would always go to church on Sundays, but now I'm really caring about that. And I am so thankful that I grew up with my parents who cared about going to church. In this world, unfortunately, there are parents and families who do not care about going to church, and that influences children to not care about going to church. But my parents always cared about raising me in church, and that has always stuck with me. And so I learned that from my parents about going to church every Sunday and staying involved. And also I learned from my parents about the importance of clean music. And I get my love for music history from my parents. My mom and dad introduced me to so much music from the 20th century. But also my parents would always want me to listen to clean music. And so I am very thankful that I learned about the importance of clean music from my parents. And hey, from December of 1984 to May of 2009, when my father passed away in 2009, for 24 and a half years, my parents were married. And I believe it that if my father was still alive to this day, I believe it that my parents would still be married, because they would always work things out maturely, and they were kind and honest and self-controlled and loyal and committed to each other in their marriage. And yeah, that's what I would strive for in the future. You know, to have a healthy marriage. And I am very thankful that I have learned these things from my parents. And I know for me, over the last 17 years now, it has been emotionally difficult for me living without my father. You know, I wish my father could have been alive and here in person to see me graduate high school, graduate college, and when I was taking on the Cedar Point Halloween job, the Kings Island Winterfest job, the Shiloh United Methodist Church internship job, and the Lakeside Chautauqua Gate job. You know, I wish my father could have been alive to see all these things in person. And I still miss my father whenever I am playing mini golf at Lakeside Chautauqua, because the way that I used to enjoy mini golf there was I would play golf there and my dad would move from one bench to another and he would see how things are going on each hole, and my dad would say his comments, and it was a very nice and joyful, positive time. And yeah, you know, I really have not played mini golf that much at Lakeside ever since my father passed away. But, you know, maybe one day I can get back into it there. And I am always remembering what my father told me when he knew that he was going to pass away. My father told me, son, just keep trucking on through. Just keep trucking on through and keep on living. Keep on living. And that is important for all of us to remember, that whenever we feel sad or upset or overwhelmed, or whenever we face difficult memories or stressful times, let us keep trucking on through. Let us keep on living. And let us find good, caring Christian company to talk to whenever we are going through difficult emotions and difficult times. Let us keep trucking on through. Let us keep on living. And I know that my father would be very happy that I have persevered and I am still alive. And my mother is very happy that I have persevered and I am still alive. And I have learned that as well from my parents, to keep on persevering and to keep on living through anything that happens in this life. And so, those are things that I have learned from my parents. I have learned that, my parents got to know each other for a couple of years and then they got married. It was not a couple of months, but my parents got to know each other for a couple of years and then they got married. And I also learned from my parents what it's like for two people to have a healthy marriage. I learned from my parents about how to treat people with kindness and honesty and self-control. And I learned from my parents about how to handle money. And, I have learned from my father to not give in to emotional spending. And also from my parents, I learned about music history and listening to clean music. And also, of course, I learned from my parents about the importance of going to church every Sunday and staying involved in church and reading the Bible and applying Christian behavior every day in every circumstance. I learned all of that from my parents. And so I am very, very, very happy about everything that I have learned from my parents.